when it comes to considering matters of state, one of the things that I often encourage people to think through is something called Hanlon's razor. You've heard of Occam's razor, right? So Hanlon's razor says, never subscribe to conspiracy, that which can be explained through idiocy.
Okay.
Right?
It's kind of an Occam's razor in and of itself, right?
Yeah. So don't give credit to a complicated conspiracy if it's easier to give credit to someone just being stupid.
Incompetence.
Right. Incompetence.
Yeah.
And the government, the federal government especially, is, as much as we all love to be Americans, we've seen the incompetence of government. It lends itself to incompetence. It's a perfect example of how a few very competent people manage a larger pool of incompetent people. So I don't believe that the government is organized or efficient enough to actually be able to manipulate the thinking patterns of people. Not when I compare that instead to the fact that they're thinking very stupidly. They're thinking, we need to put more money into the economy. How do we put more money into the economy if people don't generate more money? We extend them lines of credit. We make it easier for them to borrow. We print more money, right? Nobody's thinking 5 years down the road because no one's going to be in office for more than 4 years down the road.
Broken incentives.
Exactly. So it's like, we just need to make people happy now so that they'll vote Republican or vote Democrat again for the next election cycle. So nobody's invested long term. Nobody's got skin in the game.
Yeah.
Professional politicians, the thing they're working for is their political career, not the improvement of the American people.
Right.
That's, again, the reason that rich landowners founded this country on the idea that politicians would be professionals that stepped out of their career and sacrificed as public servants for a short period. Their vision was never what we have now, right? Trump was the closest thing that the United States has ever seen to what they actually wanted the president to look like. A career professional who stepped out to become a political servant, right? And he wasn't a great fit either, but that's how it's supposed to be. So yeah, I don't think that I understand the concern, the conspiracy behind it, but just logically speaking, it's more likely that they're just not thinking things through. They're just trying to stimulate an economy in any way that they can, because they know that anything they break today, someone else has to clean up later.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. We often consider incentives kind of be the ground stuffs of human action, right? Like, what's the old saying that no man is better than his incentives? So we all are constantly responding to incentives. And so when you frame politics that way, right, that they just have very short-term incentives. So they're willing to do whatever is necessary to get elected in this current cycle and defer all the costs and hide all the cost onto the next guy, basically. It creates these conditions of incompetence, basically. And then perhaps us as citizens, we're observing that, thinking, oh, there's some big conspiracy theory out there to make all these terrible things that are happening. But the reality is the incentives are just broken. And we're observing the manifestation of discordant human action inside of an incentive system that's not properly structured.
Right. We're taught at the agency that there's a recipe for conspiracies, right? That when conspiracy theories are born, there's a very predictable process that leads to them, right? And that process has 4 steps. The first step is there has to be something factual. Something actually has to happen, some fact. The second step is that in the tail of that fact, there's a gap of information, something that we don't know. And then the third step is in the face of that unknown information, we become suspicious, right? We become skeptical. Now, is suspicion a bad thing? No. There's healthy suspicion. Suspicion is what keeps us alive. Suspicion is supposed to work for us. But when you're following this step-by-step process of where a conspiracy theory comes from, what we become suspicious of is not the missing information. We become suspicious of why the information is missing, right? So fact-based event, missing information, healthy suspicion, then it leads to this inherent flaw in the human brain where we have to close thought loops.
Right.
So when we don't have the information we need to close our loop, we create a story.
We fill the void.
And especially with conspiracy theories, the first person to create a story that closes the loop that becomes the story that other people adopt, because it's easier to adopt an existing story than it is to come up with your own critical story, right? Your own critical thinking. So that process is what leads to conspiracy theories. That's why some conspiracy theories turn out to be true.
Yeah.
Because they're a very set pattern of events, and it just so happens that sometimes the story is accurate for the missing information.
Right.
But in plenty of cases, it's not.
Yeah.
But that's where these things persist, and they fit very well into the human condition, because we want a closed loop. We want everything to be packaged very nicely, so that we can start a conversation over a glass of wine and finish the conversation over a glass of wine. We don't want to walk away from the table with no answers.
Yeah. Man, I heard a great interview. I think it was Rick Rubin on the Huberman podcast, and he was articulating a similar point. It was like, as humans, we're always dealing with incomplete information, like radically incomplete. We just see one thing happen through our five senses, and we see another thing happen through our five senses, and then we close the gap with story. It's like we have, 0.1% of the total information, and then we just fill in the gap with some narrative. And we need to do that. Like, we need to be able to deal with the complexities of the world. But it definitely seems to open us up to deception, either by others or even by ourselves, self-deception. Are there conspiracy theories? Maybe we'll just go through a few and see if you subscribe to them or not. I mentioned one to you offline that a friend, I guess I won't name him, just a friend shared with me recently in Miami, that he was operating under the assumption that nuclear weapons were actually much less devastating than we've been led to believe. And I think you had some views on that.
Yeah, I don't know where that is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked with nuclear weapons. I was a nuclear missile officer for the Air Force until 2007, when I was recruited by CIA. So I'll be the first one to admit that the information I have is, just under 20 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in charge of nuclear weapons, they were 100% as devastating as they had been promised to be. If anything, we had found a way to make their devastation even more efficient, right? Concentrate the fireball, change the altitude of the detonation, increase the number of warheads that are on a single delivery vehicle, right? Like, they're every bit as devastating as you expect them to be. We've just been spoiled because we haven't been testing them since the 1950s, I think.
Yeah.
So because we created a treaty where we do not demonstrate the effectiveness of our nuclear weapons anymore, we essentially have two generations of people who have been born and have never actually seen a detonated nuclear device.
So the devastation of those is confirmed through, if we're not seeing it, what is it? How do you confirm this?
So there's a couple of different ways, right? So it's usually done through mathematical models.
Okay.
So when an engineer or when a nuclear weapons technician creates a weapon, they know what level of purity their uranium is or their plutonium is. They know the size of that plutonium. They know the charge, the shape of the charge. They know the detonating device. They know everything about the weapon. And they can use those to program into models how that weapon will perform based off of what they know about mathematical models previously proven true through our testing process.
Gotcha.
And that's how we do it here in the U.S. Russia does it very similarly. China does it very similarly. But then you also have the events in North Korea, and sometimes in China as well, where they still detonate underground.
Yeah.
The treaty said that we would not detonate above ground.
Oh, okay.
So we've absolutely seen in our lifetime detonations happen in underground testing facilities, right?
What about the moon landing in the 60s? Did that actually happen, or is that a conspiracy?
I believe that is a empty conspiracy, right?
Okay.
Because are there some strange, almost unbelievable things that we were able to do in the 1960s? Yeah, there are.
Yeah.
But we also know that we continued to explore space from that time forward. So either we happened to coordinate this perfect conspiracy, and then just in time, we developed the real technology to send people into space and send satellites into space and start capturing pictures on the Hubble telescope, et cetera, or we actually did land on the moon. It's very interesting to me, especially when I hear conspiracies like liquid space or flat Earth conspiracies.
I've never heard of liquid space.
Yeah, there is a conspiracy out there that space is not a vacuum, that space is actually a liquid and that we've been lied to because nobody's been to space, because they know if they went to space, they would drown, right? So there's some strange, interesting ideas out there, but it all falls into that same recipe that we were talking about, right? There's a gap of information.
Yeah.
It's whether that gap of information is something that the government has kept from you, or whether that gap of information is something where the information that's been given to you, you just don't accept, right? And I feel like the space landing is a very good example of, there's plenty of proof out there that we landed it in space, right? There's moon rocks, there's footprints that have been taken in images from satellites. Like there's independent corroborative pieces of proof that have either all been constructed in a great grand conspiracy, which according to Hanlon's razor doesn't happen, or they actually happened and you're just rejecting the proof of what you've seen, right? 9/11 and what was it, Building 7?
Yeah.
Right?
That was gonna be...
Or even the cause of 9/11 being self-imposed, right? Like these are conspiracies that I absolutely understand why they exist, because they fit the recipe.
Yeah.
But the preponderance of evidence just doesn't hold up to Hanlon's razor.
What about Building 7 though? It was 6 blocks away from the destruction, wasn't hit, and then it went down like controlled demolition. What's up with that?
I have no idea. I don't know the answers. I don't know the answers. And what I've heard of some of the conspiracies involve CIA hidden buildings or hidden offices, and I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah.
I was part of operations that were heavily compartmented.
Yeah. So
if there was a CIA office in Building 7, it was heavily compartmented.
Yeah.
So it's not the kind of thing that is going to be available information for anyone to get.
Yeah.
So I don't know the answer, but I also don't necessarily believe that the conspiracy is correct.
Yeah.
Is there some strange mystery around it? For me, yes.
Yeah.
Is that mystery worth my time, effort, energy, and money?
Yeah. It definitely feels like we are wired to, like you said, we want to close the loop, I guess, is that feeling. It's like, well, what did happen? And it leaves that feeling of drawing in your attention. I guess I will admit, I'm a bit skeptical on the moon landing in that I saw the one video of the American flag actually waving on the moon. And that just, it's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. The moon has no atmosphere. There's no wind. Why is the flag waving? Did we put some mechanics in the flag to make it look like it's waving or something? I don't know. That threw me for a bit of a loop with the moon landing.
If you like this short clip, make sure you click here to see the next clip, or here to see the full podcast episode.